Nothing says welcome to the family like third-degree burns on your wedding day. I'm Tom Carver, and I should have known my marriage was doomed the moment my father-in-law decided to light my wedding suit on fire. Not metaphorically, literally. With a goddamn Zippo lighter in the church parking lot, 30 minutes before I was supposed to walk down the aisle. "Now you can't marry my daughter," Arnie Pellegrino had shouted, his fat face red with whiskey and malice as the flames licked up the sleeve of my rented tuxedo. The smell of burning polyester filled the humid August air while wedding guests scattered like startled pigeons. I remember hitting the pavement hard, my vision going black as the fire department sirens wailed in the distance. When I came to, half the town was staring down at me with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. Marta, my bride-to-be, was crying those perfect tears that somehow made her mascara run in just the right way to look tragic rather than messy. "Tom, baby, are you okay?" she'd whispered, kneeling beside me in her $1,000 dress. But I wasn't looking at her. I was staring at Arnie, who stood 20 feet away, still holding that damn lighter, grinning like he'd just won the lottery. That's when something cold and hard settled in my chest. Not love, not forgiveness, something darker. Revenge. The wedding went on, of course. Marta insisted. "We can't let Daddy's little tantrum ruin our special day," she'd said, as if arson was just a quirky family tradition. I wore a borrowed suit that smelled like mothballs and was 2 sizes too big, but I said my vows. I promised to love, honor, and cherish Marta Pellegrino until the end. I should have added, or until I destroy your entire family, to those vows. Would have saved everyone some time. That was 5 years ago. 5 years of being the underdog husband in a town where the Pellegrino name opened doors and the Carver name got you shown to the back entrance. 5 years of Arnie's constant sabotage, his snide comments at family dinners, his deliberate attempts to undermine everything I tried to build. I work logistics for a shipping company. Nothing glamorous, but I'm good at it. I understand systems, how things connect, how one small change can create a cascade of consequences. Arnie never understood that about me. To him, I was just the blue-collar nobody who somehow tricked his precious daughter into marriage. Marta worked in advertising, all sharp suits and sharper smiles. She was beautiful in that calculated way that takes 2 hours every morning to achieve. The kind of woman who looked perfect in photos and knew exactly which angle showed off her best features. When we met, I thought I'd won the lottery. A logistics supervisor landing a woman like that? It felt like a miracle. Now I know it was more like a curse. The first sign something was wrong came about 6 months ago. Marta started working late. A lot. "Big campaign for the Morrison account," she'd explain, breezing through the door at midnight with her lipstick still perfect and her story already rehearsed. Then came the secret texts. The phone calls she took in the bathroom. The way she'd flip her phone face down whenever I walked into the room, like she was protecting state secrets instead of planning surprise parties. "You're being paranoid, Tom," she'd say when I asked about it. "You know how stressful work has been." But I'm good at logistics, remember? I notice patterns, I track details, and the details were starting to paint a picture I didn't like. The breaking point came last Tuesday. Marta had left her iPad on the kitchen counter, and a notification popped up. A message preview that made my stomach drop. "For G, can't wait to see you tonight. XOXO." Attached was a photo that left nothing to the imagination. I stared at that screen for a long time, my coffee growing cold in my hand. 5 years of marriage. 5 years of putting up with Arnie's bullshit, of being the joke at every family gathering, of pretending I didn't notice the way people looked at us like our relationship was some kind of cosmic mistake. And now this. I could have confronted her right then, could have screamed and thrown things and demanded an explanation. But that's not how logistics work. You don't react emotionally to a problem. You gather data, you analyze the situation, you plan your response. So instead, I took a photo of the screen with my phone. Evidence. Then I went to work like nothing had happened. But something had happened. Something fundamental had shifted in the machinery of my life. Marta thought she was playing me for a fool, and maybe she was right. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd forgotten that fools can be dangerous when they finally stop playing along. "I need you to follow my wife." The words tasted like ash in my mouth, but I forced them out anyway. Across the desk, Rick Santangelo, Slick Rick to his friends, raised an eyebrow that had seen better decades. His office smelled like stale cigarettes and broken dreams, which seemed appropriate for the conversation we were having. "Cheating spouse?" Rick asked, already reaching for his standard contract forms. He'd done this dance before. "That's what I'm paying you to find out." Rick was the kind of private investigator you find in the Yellow Pages, not the movies. Balding, overweight, with a mustache that belonged in a 1970s porno, but he came recommended by my buddy Dwayne, who'd used him during his own divorce proceedings. My rate is $250 a day plus expenses, Rick said, sliding the paperwork across his desk. Most cases like this, I get what you need in about a week. Take your time, I told him. I want everything. Photos, recordings, names, places, times. I want to know what she had for breakfast and who she texted about it. Rick's other eyebrow joined the first one. That's thorough. I'm a thorough guy. What I didn't tell Rick was that I'd already started my own investigation. The photo on Marta's iPad had been just the beginning. Over the past week, I'd been tracking her movements, cross-referencing her late nights at the office with the actual office schedule I'd sweet-talked out of her assistant, a sweet kid named Amy who thought I was planning a surprise for my wife. The office had been dark every single night Marta claimed to be working late. I'd also been paying attention to the social dynamics at the country club events Marta dragged me to. The way certain people looked at us, the conversations that stopped when I walked into a room, the knowing glances between Marta's friends, Trish and Jenny. Trish Kowalski was Marta's work friend, a bottle blonde with a voice like nails on a chalkboard and a talent for gossip that bordered on supernatural. Jenny Martinez was the enabler, the one who always had an excuse ready for whatever Marta was doing. Together, they formed a triangle of complicity that I was just beginning to understand. But the real revelation came at the Morrison Industries summer barbecue, 3 days after I'd hired Rick. I was standing by the beer cooler, trying to look invisible in my off-the-rack khakis and polo shirt, when I overheard Trish talking to a group of women near the pool. I'm just saying, Marta's been glowing lately, Trish was saying, her voice carrying that particular tone women use when they're about to share something delicious. Must be all that extra exercise she's been getting. The women giggled, and Jenny chimed in. Well, you know what they say about real estate developers. They know how to work with their hands. More giggling, and then the devastating punch. Greg Fallon's always been good with his hands, said a woman I didn't recognize. Just ask his wife. Oh wait, she doesn't know, does she? The laughter that followed felt like ice water in my veins. Greg Fallon, I knew that name. He'd been at our wedding, in fact. Tall, perfectly groomed, with the kind of easy confidence that comes from never having to worry about money. He developed luxury properties around the lake, the kind of places where people like Marta dreamed of living and people like me could never afford. I'd seen him talking to Marta at various social events over the years, but I'd never thought much of it. He was married to Sharon, a quiet woman who seemed to exist primarily to make Greg look good at public functions. They were the kind of couple that appeared in the society pages of the local newspaper, all fake smiles and expensive clothes. Now suddenly, those conversations between Greg and Marta took on a different meaning. The way he'd touch her arm when he talked to her, the way she'd laugh just a little too loud at his jokes, the way they'd both find excuses to step away from their respective spouses at the same time. I was so lost in this revelation that I almost didn't notice when Greg himself appeared at my elbow. Tom, right? He said, extending a hand that had probably never done an honest day's work in its life. Greg Fallon, I don't think we've been properly introduced. We met at my wedding, I said, shaking his hand and resisting the urge to squeeze hard enough to break something. 5 years ago. Right, of course. His smile was perfect, practiced. How's the logistics business treating you? Can't complain. I took a sip of my beer, studying his face. How's real estate? Booming. Actually, I've been meaning to talk to you about that. Marta mentioned you might be interested in upgrading your living situation. That was news to me. Our house was modest but comfortable, and we'd never discussed moving. But I just nodded and said, always open to hearing about opportunities. Great. I've got a development going up on the north shore of the lake. High-end stuff. Might be perfect for a young couple looking to make a statement. The way he said young couple made my skin crawl, like he was talking about strangers instead of my wife and me. Sounds expensive, I said. Well, for the right buyer, I'm sure we could work something out. Maybe Marta and I could discuss the details over lunch sometime. And there it was, right out in the open, with his wife 20 feet away and mine laughing with her friends by the pool. The sheer audacity of it was almost impressive. I'll mention it to her, I said, keeping my voice level. You do that? Greg's smile never wavered. I think she'd be very interested in what I have to offer. I watched him walk away, rejoining his wife with the same easy confidence he'd shown while essentially propositioning mine in front of me. The bastard wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. That's when I knew Rick's investigation was going to confirm what I already suspected. The question wasn't whether Marta was cheating. The question was what I was going to do about it. My phone buzzed with a text message. Marta. Working late again tonight. Don't wait up. Love you. I looked across the yard to where she was standing with Trish and Jenny, her phone in her hand, not even bothering to look in my direction as she sent her lie. Love you too, sweetheart, I thought, but not for much longer. Rick's report arrived on a Thursday morning, delivered in a manila envelope that felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I sat in my truck in the shipping company parking lot, staring at the envelope for a full 5 minutes before I worked up the courage to open it. The photos were worse than I'd imagined. Marta and Greg at his lake house, her legs wrapped around his waist as he pressed her against a sliding glass door. Marta and Greg in his BMW, her head in his lap in the parking lot of the Marriott downtown. Marta and Greg on what looked like the deck of a yacht, both of them naked as the day they were born. But it was the timestamps that really got to me. Every single one of these photos corresponded to a night when Marta had told me she was working late or having dinner with the girls. 3 months of lies, documented in high-definition color. Rick had been thorough. The report included phone records showing hundreds of calls and texts between Marta and Greg, hotel receipts, restaurant bills, even a rental agreement for the yacht paid for with a credit card I'd never seen before. And then there was the financial information that made my veins run hot with fury. Somehow, Rick had discovered that Arnie had been funneling money to Greg's development company through a series of shell corporations. My father-in-law, the man who'd never missed an opportunity to remind me that I wasn't good enough for his daughter, was bankrolling her affair. The whole thing was a family business. I called in sick to work and spent the rest of the day planning. Not an emotional response. That would come later. This was pure logistics. I had a problem that needed solving, and I was going to solve it systematically. Step 1. Gather more evidence. That night, while Marta was supposedly having dinner with Jenny, I drove out to Greg's lake house. It was a sprawling modern monstrosity that probably cost more than I'd make in 10 years, all glass and steel jutting out over the water like a middle finger to good taste. Greg's BMW was in the driveway, along with Marta's Honda. So much for dinner with Jenny. I parked a quarter-mile down the road and walked back through the woods, my phone ready to record whatever I found. The house was lit up like a Christmas tree, and through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see everything. Marta was there, all right. Wearing a red dress I'd never seen before, dancing to music I couldn't hear while Greg watched from a leather sofa that probably cost more than my truck. She moved like she was putting on a show, and from the expression on Greg's face, he was enjoying every second of it. I recorded for about 10 minutes, getting clear shots of both their faces, before headlights appeared on the road behind me. Greg's wife Sharon, driving a white Mercedes SUV. This was about to get interesting. I watched from the tree line as Sharon parked next to the other cars and walked up to the front door. She had a key, which she used without knocking. Through the windows, I saw her walk into the living room just as Marta was settling into Greg's lap. The explosion was immediate. Even from 100 yards away, I could hear Sharon screaming. Marta jumped up like she'd been electrocuted, scrambling for her purse while Greg tried to calm his wife down. It didn't work. Sharon grabbed a bottle of wine from the coffee table and hurled it at Greg's head. He ducked, and the bottle shattered against the window I'd been watching through, spider-webbing the glass, but not breaking it completely. Marta made a run for the door, but Sharon was faster. She caught Marta by the hair and spun her around, and for a moment I thought I was about to witness a murder. But Sharon just slapped her once, hard enough that the sound carried across the water, and then shoved her toward the door. "Get out of my house, you whore!" Marta stumbled outside, clutching her purse and her dignity, while Sharon turned her attention back to Greg. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but her body language suggested it wasn't a discussion about their weekend plans. Marta fumbled with her car keys, her hands shaking so badly she dropped them twice before managing to get the door open. She peeled out of the driveway like her ass was on fire, leaving Greg to deal with his wife's righteous fury. I waited until both women were gone before making my move. The house was dark now, except for one light in what looked like the kitchen. Greg was probably nursing his wounds and trying to figure out how to explain the broken window to his insurance company. I crept up to the house and tried the sliding door that led to the deck. Unlocked. These rich people never learned to secure their shit properly. Inside, the house smelled like expensive cologne and broken dreams. I could hear Greg talking on the phone in another room, probably calling a lawyer or a therapist or both. I had maybe 5 minutes before he finished his call and came looking for more wine to drown his sorrows. I planted a small digital recorder under the coffee table, the kind you can buy at any electronics store for $30. If Greg was going to have more conversations about my wife, I wanted to hear them. Then I saw something that made me smile for the first time in weeks. Greg's laptop was sitting open on the kitchen counter, still logged into his email. I quickly scrolled through his recent messages, taking photos of anything that looked interesting. Love letters to Marta, business correspondence with Arnie, financial documents that showed just how much money was changing hands. But the real gold mine was in his sent folder. Messages to other women. Lots of other women. Greg Fallon wasn't just cheating on his wife with mine. He was running a regular harem. Photos, explicit messages, hotel reservations. This guy was a serial adulterer, and he'd been stupid enough to document everything. I heard footsteps approaching the kitchen and quickly closed the laptop. Time to go. I slipped back out through the sliding door and made it to the tree line just as Greg walked into the kitchen. He stood there for a moment, looking around like he sensed something was wrong, then grabbed a bottle of whiskey from a cabinet and headed back toward the living room. Amateur. In logistics, we call that poor situational awareness. I made it back to my truck without incident and drove home, my mind already working on step 2 of my plan. I had evidence now. Lots of it. But evidence was just ammunition. I needed a target. Marta was already home when I arrived, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and a story ready. Jenny wasn't feeling well, so we cut dinner short, she said without looking up from her phone. How was your evening? Quiet, I said, hanging my keys on the hook by the door. Watched some TV, went to bed early. She nodded absently, still focused on her phone. Probably texting Greg, trying to figure out how to handle the Sharon situation. I kissed the top of her head like a good husband should. Her hair smelled like Greg's cologne. I love you, I said, and for the first time in our marriage, I meant it as a threat instead of a promise. She looked up then, something flickering in her eyes. Suspicion? Guilt? Fear? I love you too, she said, but her voice sounded hollow. I went upstairs, lay in our bed, and listened to her move around downstairs. She was on the phone again, her voice too low for me to hear, but clearly urgent. Good. She should be worried. Tomorrow I would begin dismantling their world, one piece at a time. Unlike Arnie's stunt with my wedding suit, my fire would burn everything. The first domino fell that Saturday morning at the farmer's market. I'd spent the week since the lake house incident planning carefully. This wasn't about random destruction. It was about precision strikes designed for maximum damage with minimal legal risk. My target, Greg, Marta, and Arnie, using their weaknesses against them. Sharon Fallon was my first target. I found her at the organic produce stand, looking disheveled, her usual polished appearance gone. Mrs. Fallon, I approached cautiously. I'm Tom Carver. We met at a few social events. She looked up, her eyes suspicious. Oh, yes, Marta's husband. I wanted to talk about our respective spouses, I said, pulling out my phone and showing her a photo Rick had taken. It wasn't explicit, just Marta and Greg having an intimate dinner. Sharon stared at the photo for a long moment, then glanced up at me, respect creeping into her eyes. How long have you known? She asked. About a week. You? I suspected for months, but I caught them at the lake house on Thursday. I know. I was there. Her eyebrows shot up. You were there? Taking pictures. Saw you arrive. Nice throw with the wine bottle. Softball in college, she said, almost smiling. I quickly shifted focus. I'm not here to compare notes. I'm offering a partnership. A partnership? We make sure they get what they deserve, publicly, permanently. Sharon's emotions shifted rapidly, from hurt to fury to cold calculation. I explained how Greg had been using their joint account for hotels, paying for his affairs. I also showed her photos of business documents that revealed her husband's company was a money laundering operation for Arnie's business. Sharon's face went pale. That's fraud. Federal fraud. Not necessarily, but it would be embarrassing if the right people found out. What do you want me to do? I want you to help destroy them. All of them. We'll use their actions against them. But we have to be smart about it. No illegal activity. Sharon thought for a long moment before nodding. What's the first step? Social destruction. They care more about their reputations than anything. We take that away from them. Sharon agreed to play the part of the devastated wife for a few more days. The second domino fell that Tuesday at the Chamber of Commerce dinner. I'd never attended before, but this time I made an exception. Arnie was at his usual table, surrounded by sycophants. Greg was there too, looking nervous. Marta was across the room, pointedly avoiding Greg. During the cocktail hour, I went over to Arnie's table. Evening, Arnie, I said, sitting down without invitation. Mind if I join you? Tommy boy, he sneered. What brings you to grown-up night? I smiled and replied, just wanted to congratulate you on your recent business success. The Fallon development deal must be quite lucrative. The chuckling around the table stopped. Arnie's smile flickered. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you do. The shell company deals, the cash transfers. You've been laundering money through Greg's real estate projects for 2 years. The silence at the table was deafening. These men might have been Arnie's friends, but they were businessmen first, and the word money laundering tended to make businessmen nervous. You don't know what you're talking about, Arnie repeated, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. Maybe not, I said, pulling out my phone, but I know what I saw in Greg's email account, and I know what the IRS would think about some of those transactions. Arnie's face went red. You little shit! Are you threatening me? Not threatening, just making conversation. I stood up, straightening my tie. Enjoy your dinner, gentlemen, and Arnie, give my regards to Dolores. Dolores was Arnie's secretary. She was also, according to the photos I'd found in Greg's laptop, one of his regular side pieces. The look of pure panic that crossed Arnie's face told me he understood the implication. I walked away from the table, leaving behind a group of very uncomfortable men and one terrified father-in-law. By the time I reached the bar, I could hear them starting to whisper among themselves. The third domino was already wobbling, but the real fireworks started the next morning when Sharon Fallon held a press conference. I watched it from my office, streaming live on the local news website. Sharon stood on the steps of the courthouse, flanked by 2 lawyers and looking like a woman who had nothing left to lose. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, her voice steady and clear, I'm here today to announce that I'm filing for divorce from my husband, Greg Fallon, on grounds of adultery and financial misconduct. The reporters perked up. Divorce announcements weren't usually press conference material. Furthermore, Sharon continued, I'm calling for a full investigation into Mr. Fallon's business practices, specifically his relationship with several local investors and the questionable nature of many of his real estate transactions. She held up a folder thick with documents. I have evidence of multiple extramarital affairs, including an ongoing relationship with Marta Carver, the wife of a local logistics manager. I also have evidence suggesting that Mr. Fallon's company has been used as a vehicle for questionable financial arrangements with local business leaders. The camera zoomed in on Sharon's face as she delivered the final strike. I'm also announcing that I'm offering a reward of $50,000 for any information that leads to criminal charges against my husband or his business associates. The press conference ended with Sharon walking away, ignoring the shouted questions from reporters. But the damage was done. Within an hour, the story was all over social media. Within 2 hours, it was picked up by the regional news networks. By dinner time, everyone in town knew that Greg Fallon was a cheating, possibly criminal scumbag, and that Marta Carver was his whore. My phone had been ringing all day. Reporters, friends, co-workers, all wanting to know my reaction to the news. I let them all go to voicemail. Marta came home that evening looking like she'd been hit by a truck. Her face was pale, her hands were shaking, and she couldn't meet my eyes. Tom? She said, standing in the doorway like she was afraid to come into her own house. We need to talk. Do we? I was sitting at the kitchen table, eating a sandwich and reading the news coverage on my tablet. About what? About what Sharon said today. You mean about you being with Greg Fallon? What about it? The words hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. Marta's face crumpled, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. It's not what you think, she said. Really? Because I think you've been cheating on me for months with a married man while your father bankrolled the whole thing. Am I wrong? Marta opened her mouth, then closed it again. What was she going to say? That it was all a misunderstanding? That Sharon was lying? That the photos and emails and hotel receipts were all fake? How long have you known? She asked finally. Long enough. Why didn't you say anything? I looked up from my tablet, meeting her eyes for the first time since she'd come home. Because I was planning this, I said simply. All of it. Sharon's press conference, the investigation, the public humiliation. I've been planning it for weeks. Marta's face went from pale to gray. You orchestrated this? Every bit of it, and this is just the beginning. She stared at me like she was seeing a stranger. Maybe she was. What do you want? She whispered. I want you to pack a bag and get out of my house, I said. Tonight, don't come back. Tom, please. We can work this out. We can go to counseling. We can... No, I said, standing up. We can't. Because in about an hour, Channel 7 is going to run a follow-up story about Greg's other affairs. And tomorrow, the Tribune is going to publish a detailed investigation into his business dealings with your father. And by the end of the week, everyone in this town is going to know exactly what kind of people you are. Marta was crying now. Real tears that made her mascara run in black streaks down her cheeks. I'm sorry, she said. I'm so sorry. I know you are, I said. But not because you did it. You're sorry because you got caught. She stood there for another moment, like she was waiting for me to change my mind. When I didn't, she turned and walked upstairs to pack. I listened to her moving around in our bedroom, opening drawers and closets, gathering up the pieces of her life. When she came back downstairs with a suitcase, I was still sitting at the kitchen table. Where will you go? I asked. Trish said I could stay with her for a few days. Good luck with that, I said. You might want to call first. Trish got fired today. Marta's eyes widened. What? Turns out her boss doesn't appreciate employees who help cover up affairs that end up on the evening news. Bad for the agency's image. The look of horror on Marta's face was almost worth the 5 years of marriage. She left without another word, and I sat in my empty house, listening to the silence and planning my next move. Because this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Arnie still had to pay for burning my wedding suit, and I was going to make sure he burned a lot more than that. The final act began on a Thursday morning with a phone call that changed everything. Tom? It's Sharon. We have a problem. I was at my desk at the shipping company, going through invoices and pretending my life hadn't fallen apart over the past 2 weeks. Since Marta had moved out, I'd been living like a monk. Work, home, sleep, repeat. The media attention had quieted down, but the gossip hadn't. Everyone in town had an opinion about my situation, and most of them felt the need to share it. What kind of problem? I asked, switching to my personal phone. Greg's trying to leave town. I just drove by the house, and there's a moving truck in the driveway. That wasn't part of the plan. Greg was supposed to stay put and face the music like a man. Running away was going to complicate things. Where's he going? I don't know, but I overheard him on the phone yesterday talking about Phoenix. He's got family there. I thought quickly. If Greg disappeared now, he'd take half the satisfaction of my revenge with him. Plus, there were still loose ends to tie up. The investigation into his business dealings was just getting started, and Arnie was still walking around free as a bird, acting like nothing had happened. Meet me at the diner on 5th Street in an hour, I said. We need to talk. Sharon was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth and looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. The past 2 weeks had been hard on her, too. Filing for divorce was one thing, but living through the media circus that followed was something else entirely. He's liquidating everything, she said without preamble. The business, the properties, even the boat. He's converting it all to cash. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It makes it easier to track if the feds get involved. The feds aren't going to get involved, Tom. I talked to my lawyer this morning. The business stuff is shady, but it's not technically illegal. Arnie's been careful about how he structures the deals. That was disappointing, but not surprising. Men like Arnie didn't stay in business for 40 years by leaving obvious paper trails. What about the adultery angle? Adultery isn't a crime anymore. The worst Greg's looking at is a nasty divorce and some bad publicity. If he leaves town, even that goes away eventually. I stared out the diner window, watching traffic crawl by on 5th Street. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. Greg was supposed to be destroyed, not relocated. Arnie was supposed to pay for what he'd done, not walk away with a slap on the wrist. There has to be something else, I said. Some way to make sure they don't just disappear and start over somewhere else. Sharon was quiet for a moment, stirring her coffee with a spoon that had seen better days. There might be, she said finally, but you're not going to like it. Try me. Arnie's wife called me yesterday. That was unexpected. Dorothy Pellegrino was a sweet woman who'd been married to Arnie for 35 years. She kept house, volunteered at the church, and generally stayed out of her husband's business dealings. I'd always liked her, even when I hated her husband. What did she want? To apologize. Apparently, she's known about Arnie's affairs for years. She knows about Dolores, about the others. She's been keeping quiet because she didn't want to embarrass the family. But she's tired of being embarrassed by her husband instead. She wants to help. I felt something stir in my chest. Not hope, exactly, but something close to it. Help how? She has access to Arnie's home office. His personal files, his computer, everything. She says there are things there that would make our evidence look like a parking ticket. What kind of things? She wouldn't say over the phone, but she wants to meet with us. Tonight? I thought it over. Dorothy Pellegrino had never struck me as the vengeful type, but then again, I'd never been married to Arnie for 35 years. Maybe she'd finally reached her breaking point. Where does she want to meet? The old church on Maple Street, the one that's been closed for renovations. She has a key. She's on the committee that's overseeing the work. It sounded like something out of a spy novel, but then again, my whole life had taken on a surreal quality lately. What time? 8 o'clock. And Tom? She wants to do this right. No half measures, no warning shots. If we're going to take Arnie down, she wants to make sure he stays down. I looked at Sharon across the table, this woman who'd gone from stranger to ally to co-conspirator in the space of 2 weeks. Her husband had cheated on her, stolen from her, and humiliated her in front of the entire town. But instead of crawling into a hole and hiding, she was ready to fight back. "Okay," I said. "Let's see what Dorothy has to say." The old church on Maple Street had been built in 1923 and looked every day of its age. The renovation project had been going on for 2 years, hampered by funding issues and the kind of bureaucratic delays that plagued every public project in town. At 8 o'clock on a Thursday night, it was as dark and empty as a tomb. Dorothy was waiting for us in the vestibule, a small woman in her 60s with silver hair and the kind of quiet dignity that comes from a lifetime of putting up with other people's nonsense. She looked nervous, but determined, like someone who'd finally decided to stop being a victim. "Thank you for coming," she said, leading us into the main sanctuary. The pews had been removed for refinishing, leaving a vast empty space that smelled of sawdust and old wood. I wasn't sure you'd believe me. "We're here," I said. "What do you have for us?" Dorothy reached into her purse and pulled out a thick manila envelope. "Arnie keeps records of everything, every deal, every payment, every arrangement. He thinks I don't know about his office safe, but I've watched him open it 1,000 times. She handed the envelope to Sharon, who opened it and began flipping through the contents. Even in the dim light filtering through the stained glass windows, I could see her eyes widening. "Jesus Christ," Sharon whispered. "This is—" "What?" I asked. "Bank records, offshore accounts, wire transfers to politicians. This isn't just money laundering. This is bribery, tax evasion, racketeering. Arnie's been running a criminal enterprise for decades." Dorothy nodded sadly. "I've known for years, but I was too scared to do anything about it. Too scared of what would happen to me, to our family. But after what happened with Marta and Greg, after seeing how he helped destroy your marriage just to protect his own interests..." She trailed off, but I understood. Arnie's willingness to sacrifice his own daughter's marriage to protect his business dealings had finally pushed his wife past her breaking point. "Why now?" I asked. "Why are you willing to risk everything now?" Dorothy looked around the empty church, her eyes settling on the altar where the cross had been removed for cleaning. "Because I don't have much time," she said simply. "Cancer. The doctors say I have maybe 6 months, maybe less. And I don't want to spend whatever time I have left protecting a man who spent our entire marriage deceiving me." The silence that followed was profound. Sharon and I exchanged glances, both of us realizing that this had just become about more than revenge. This was about justice. "What do you want us to do with this?" Sharon asked, holding up the envelope. "I want you to make sure Arnie faces consequences for what he's done. Real consequences. And I want you to make sure Greg doesn't get away clean either." "The evidence against Greg is mostly circumstantial," I said. "He was careful to keep his hands clean on the big stuff." Dorothy smiled for the first time since we'd arrived. "Not as careful as he thought. Check page 17. Sharon flipped to page 17 and whistled low. "Holy shit. Greg's been skimming money from the deals, taking cash off the top before it gets to Arnie." "How much?" I asked. "According to this, about 200,000 over the past year." I felt a slow smile spreading across my face. "That's embezzlement. Federal embezzlement. And fraud," Sharon added, "and probably a dozen other charges I can't pronounce." Dorothy nodded. "Arnie found out about it last week. He was planning to handle it quietly, make Greg pay the money back and disappear, but now that everything's public... Now he can't afford to let Greg walk away," I finished, "because if Greg gets arrested, he'll roll over on Arnie to save himself." "Exactly. So Arnie's been trying to get Greg out of town before the investigation gets too deep. He's even helping pay for the move." The pieces were falling into place. Arnie wasn't just protecting Greg out of family loyalty, he was protecting himself. And if we played this right, we could take them both down together. "What's your timeline?" I asked Dorothy. "Arnie's planning to drive Greg to the airport tomorrow night. Private flight to Phoenix, then Greg disappears forever." "Then we need to move fast," Sharon said. "If we're going to do this, it has to be tomorrow." "Do what exactly?" Dorothy asked. I looked at both women, these unlikely allies in my war against the people who'd destroyed my marriage and humiliated me for years. "We're going to give this town a show they'll never forget," I said, "and we're going to make sure Arnie and Greg get exactly what they deserve." The plan was simple, elegant, and completely insane. The next evening, while Arnie was driving Greg to his private flight to freedom, the FBI would be waiting at the airport with arrest warrants based on the evidence Dorothy had provided. But that was just the opening act. The real show would happen at the town square, where I'd arranged for what I was calling a public accountability session. I'd sent invitations to everyone in town, business leaders, politicians, reporters, even the mayor. The invitation was deliberately vague, promising revelations about corruption in our community and justice for those who've been wronged. Most people probably thought it was some kind of political rally or community meeting. They had no idea they were about to witness the complete destruction of two of the town's most prominent citizens. Sharon and Dorothy were positioned at opposite ends of the square, each with copies of the evidence and instructions to distribute it to reporters and law enforcement if anything went wrong. I was in the center, standing on the same gazebo where the town held its summer concerts and political rallies. At exactly 7 o'clock, I stepped up to the microphone I'd rented for the occasion. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice carrying across the square to the crowd of maybe 200 people who'd gathered out of curiosity. "Thank you for coming. I know many of you are wondering why you're here." I looked out at the faces in the crowd. I saw Marta standing near the back with Trish and Jenny, all of them looking nervous. I saw some of Arnie's business associates, some of Greg's clients, some of my coworkers from the shipping company. 5 years ago, on my wedding day, a man named Arnie Pellegrino set my wedding suit on fire. He said I wasn't good enough to marry his daughter. He said I'd never amount to anything. A murmur went through the crowd. Most of them remembered the incident. It had been the talk of the town for weeks. "He was wrong about one thing," I continued. "I did amount to something. I amounted to the man who's going to destroy him." The murmur turned into a buzz of excited conversation. People were pulling out their phones, starting to record. For the past 5 years, Arnie Pellegrino has run a criminal enterprise out of his construction business. He's laundered money, bribed officials, and corrupted every institution in this town that was supposed to protect us from people like him. I held up a copy of Dorothy's evidence, thick enough that everyone could see it. I have bank records, wire transfers, recorded conversations, photographs, evidence of crimes that go back decades. The buzz turned into a roar. Reporters were pushing toward the front of the crowd, cameras were flashing, and I could see several people already on their phones, probably calling lawyers or the police or both. "But Arnie didn't work alone," I said, raising my voice to be heard over the crowd. "He had help from a man named Greg Fallon, who used his real estate business to wash Arnie's dirty money, the same Greg Fallon who's been sleeping with my wife for the past 6 months. More cameras, more shouting. I saw Marta's face in the crowd, pale and stricken. "Right now," I continued, "both of these men are at the airport, trying to flee the country before they can be arrested. But they're too late. The FBI is already there, waiting for them." As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text from Sharon. "Both arrested. It's over." I held up my phone, showing the message to the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, justice has been served." The crowd erupted. People were cheering, shouting questions, pushing toward the gazebo, but I wasn't finished yet. "There's one more thing," I said, and the crowd gradually quieted down. 5 years ago, Arnie Pellegrino burned my wedding suit and told me I'd never be good enough for his family. Tonight, I want to return the favor. I reached behind the podium and pulled out a glass case containing the charred remains of my original wedding suit, preserved exactly as it had been on my wedding day. "Arnie," I said, looking directly at the news cameras, "this is for you." I opened the case and turned it upside down, letting the ashes scatter in the wind. They drifted across the crowd like black snow, settling on the people who'd come to witness my revenge. "Sometimes you have to burn it all down," I said into the microphone, "just to see who's left standing in the smoke." The crowd went wild. People were laughing, crying, cheering, and recording everything for posterity. It was chaos, it was beautiful, and it was exactly what I'd planned. As I walked away from the gazebo, leaving the crowd to their celebration, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Satisfaction. Complete, total, overwhelming satisfaction. Arnie and Greg were in federal custody, facing charges that would put them away for decades. Marta's reputation was destroyed, her career was over, and she'd spend the rest of her life known as the woman who betrayed her husband for a criminal. And me? I was the hero of the story. The underdog who'd fought back against corruption and won. The man who'd turned his personal tragedy into a public triumph. My phone was already ringing with interview requests from reporters, job offers from companies that wanted to hire the guy who'd taken down the most corrupt businessman in town, and messages of support from people I hadn't heard from in years. But the best message came from Dorothy Pellegrino, sent from her hospital bed where she was watching the news coverage. "Thank you for giving me the chance to do the right thing before it was too late. Arnie got what he deserved, and so did you." I walked home through streets filled with people talking about what they just witnessed, past houses where TVs glowed with news coverage of the arrests, through a town that would never look at me the same way again. 5 years ago, I'd been the joke of my own wedding, the man whose suit got burned by his father-in-law. Tonight, I was the man who'd burned down an entire criminal empire with nothing but patience, planning, and a willingness to wait for the perfect moment to strike back. Sometimes the best revenge isn't a dish served cold, sometimes it's a fire that burns so bright the whole world stops to watch.